Everybody, Sven Diesel here. We're going to be tying up the two-tone jelly zonker. The name of this will become evident as we begin going through the materials we're going to be using. We're first starting with an Ahrex minnow hook. This is a 1/0. It's the SA280. We're going to be using some Semper Fly nano silk in a 6/0 size. I like to use a little bit of a stronger thread or GSP in this instance because I usually fish this in the shallows, dragging it on the rocks and through all sorts of various materials, so I want to make sure it's super durable. So start your thread, get it down the shank of the hook, and cut off your tag end. And for this style and most of my rabbit tail or zonker style flies, I like to use a mono loop to help reduce the amount of fouls or the flippity flop of that tail without restricting its movement. So I cut off about a 5-inch piece of this 20-pound mono. I'll tie it in on the top of the shank and work it well into the bend about a quarter of the way down, and then we'll progress our thread up out of the way because we're going to next tie in our rabbit strip. So what this mono loop will do is it restricts a little bit of movement but pretty much reduces almost all chances of it fouling. So for this particular fly, we're going to be using this Grizzly barred rabbit strip. It's not technically a zonker strip, but it is we're tying it in zonker style. And so for the end of the tail, I'll just cut it to a point, and then what we want to do is I want this to roughly be 3 lengths the shank of this hook. It's a shorter hook, and so I need about 3 times, and then I will measure out where it's going to intersect the bend, and then I'll just kind of separate the hair here, and then I'm going to poke it through hide side first, and then the hair of course coming out of the hook point at this point. That way it's properly seated for when we are going to be tying it in. So the first step is let's get it down beneath our jaws, and then what I'm going to do is position it right there on the top of the mono, advance my thread back up to that point, and then what we're going to do is we're going to concave that hide over the shank of the hook and do about 4 to 5 wraps. So separate the hair as much as you can, and then I just kind of bring it up and over and drop it and bring it up and over, and I'm pinching that hide with my right hand so it doesn't shift or move. And then now I'm going to kind of crank down as I come up and over so it's nice and secure, and then I lift it up and do some reverse wraps. That's going to kind of pinch those wraps all together and hold it in place. So there we go. We've got our hides positioned, and now we're going to go back to this mono loop. I'm going to take a bodkin, and the way I do it, and this is just something I do with all my flies, I find a pattern that works, and I take the whole tail and I divide it in half, and then I'm just going to poke a hole in it. And you may think, hey, this is going to weaken the fly. I've never had one break here. I've never had one ruin because of the mono loop. However, I am puncturing it directly in the middle, so if you go to a side that could be different, or maybe you catch a big enough fish that bites your whole tail off, I'm not sure. Hopefully that's the case, but hopefully the hook's still in his jaw. But I take the mono, shove it through the hole, bring it up and around, and I'm going to tie it into the shank of the hook just right there on top. And these are loose wraps at this point because I want to position the loop, and the way I do that is I pull the tail tight, and then I pull the mono so it's still a little bit of a loop. It's not binding the tail to go smaller. And then once it's positioned, I'll go ahead and just wrap with some nice secure wraps all the way back, and I'm kind of pushing that mono right up against the hook shank with my left hand, and then of course we'll trim out that mono. There's no securing, like there's no structural integrity. That mono's not hooked to a hook, it's just the tail to prevent it from fouling. And the way it does that is the first half is now just positioned and it's going to be nice and secure. So next we're going to tie in our lead eyes, and what I do is I position them so that they're right even with the eye of the hook, and I do 3 loose wraps and then pull down, and that will shift it into place. And then I do crisscross wraps so that it's perpendicular to the hook shank. And if you've struggled with eyes, that's a little trick I learned from a friend. Just those 3 loose wraps and then pull down, and it positions it perfect. And then I'll just take a little bit of Z-cement here just to keep those eyes in place from shifting around, and we'll just put a little dab right here on top, and that just kind of binds everything together and keeps those eyes in place for the remainder of the fly and for future integrity of the fly. And so I do a few wraps just to get that super glue kind of seated down in so it's not going to be in our way. And then here's where the fly gets its name. This is a a new product by FNF. It's their two-toned jelly. I guess it's not a chenille, they call it their jelly, but this is the fire prawn on yellow, and I really like this. So it's a two-toned, variegated, I guess would be the other way of maybe saying it, or grizzly, I don't know. But so yeah, that's where this fly gets its name, the two-tone jelly, Zonker. So it's a Zonker style fly with using two-tone jelly. So I don't know if you guys figured that out. Now you can't pull away the fibers like you do chenille, and so what I did is I just cut off some of the excess, leaving the core, and then I'll tie that in and then advance my thread all the way up. And if you're really lucky when you're palmering this, it kind of goes one direction, and as you're twisting it around, you want to have these be super tight. I'm going for a dense body because this is what's going to help create the profile of this baitfish imitation. That Zonker strip's going to fold up and over, and also I want a lot of material here, so it's super attractive and awesome looking. And as you're palmering this around, if you twist it the right way, it's going to lay back naturally. And you can see I'm kind of struggling to find that groove, and the more of these you do, I know this is a material particularly used for blobs and stuff like that, but as you're twisting it around, I'm going to kind of start twisting it the opposite direction I've been doing, and you can see it's laying even more flat on the shank. And so let's go a little bit more, twist it, and then there we go. So you just want to preen those back, and then now I found my groove. It's starting to lay how I want, and we'll just continue to advance this all the way up to right behind the eyes. And we're going to then tie in some rubber legs to add more profile, or to add more ability to push water, I guess is what you'd say, and a little bit more squirmy wormy type of flowiness to this fly. If that's actually descriptive vocabulary, I'd be surprised if that was ever written down. I don't even know if I could repeat what I just said, but anyway, do a secure wrap, leave it up on top, and then what I'm going to do is I've got these new fire two-tone grizzly legs from Hairline. I'm going to pull off about 4 of these. 3 or 4 is what kind of I do for most of these baitfish imitations, and then I'll advance my thread right behind the eye. I'll fold the legs in half around my thread, and then I'll bring it up and over, secure it down with a little bit of space between the eye and where I'm tying this off, and then I'll advance it right over the eyes. I'll divide my legs in 2 to each side, and then pull them down at a downward angle. I'm not really pulling tension on them, I'm just kind of having them sit, and then I'll do about 15 wraps, and then I'll zigzag over to secure those eyes. And on the wraps behind the eyes, make sure you don't go super tight because you could cut the legs, and that's why I do those crisscross a little bit tighter, and then they're of course secured in at the nose. And then we'll get those out of the way and do another wrap of this two-tone jelly in front of those eyes. I like to get 1 or 2 wraps just to add a little bit thicker dimension, so it's breaking it a little bit apart from the rest of the body. And then the way I finish this off is I come on the underneath side here, I pull it tight, and then I'm going to bring it, making sure not to get these legs intertwined here. We're going to bring it right up and underneath those eyes, and then right up to the hook eye. So you can see how I'm going in between the lead on the underside, and then I'll just wrap my thread up and over and give it about 2 wraps here. And as I do those wraps, then I'm going to position it in the dead center, and then I'll do a couple wraps in front to pinch those 2 wraps we just did, and then of course I can trim it out. And what we did is we just covered the underneath side, but I want to make sure it's super durable, and the way I've been doing this is kind of, I guess, a cheater's method using UV resin. But I'm just going to take a little bit of this UV resin, and I'm going to put a glob right here, kind of over on the side of the eyes, and then I'll take another glob and I'll do it on the opposing side. And you can't be afraid to get a little bit of this resin on your fingers. If you haven't burned yourself with that resin yet, then you need to use more resin. So then I'll just kind of push it into place, and I'm trapping those fibers into that resin. I'll go ahead and cure it, and you can see how it just suctioned right to those eyes. You could potentially brush that out and get it a little bit looser, but that 1 increases the durability as it's dragging along the rocks, but 2, it makes it super easy to finish this fly because all our fibers are out of the way. So if you're going to brush it, wait until we're done. And then what I want to do is I don't pre-cut my rabbit strips, what I do is I bring it up and over, just laying it down, and then I wrap it up and over, because I found if I pre-cut it, we're missing those hairs that are trapped right now, that I'm only trapping the hairs, not the hide, and so it weakens the head, meaning there's less fibers there. So then once I have about 2 or 3 wraps there, I'll trim out the hide. And as you do that, just be super careful not to cut your thread. And this is why we left a little bit of gap between the eye and our rubber legs in the beginning, so we've got more room here to tie this in. And then I'll just clean up this head here with a bunch of thread wraps and create a little bit of a head. This is kind of that traditional salmon fly tying in me that I don't have a lot of or skill at, but I do like those black heads on those flies, and so we're just going to create that. So if you wanted to do a hot spot pink head, you could do that as well. Just swap out your thread or a red, use red thread, but for this one I chose black. And then we'll whip finish, and then the last step is we're just going to put some UV resin to seal all of that thread wraps and whip finish, cut the legs to length, and when you're finishing this fly, you want to use a penetrating resin. But let's get these hairs. You can see I've got a couple fibers trapped in right there coming out of the eye there, and so I'm going to actually grab a lighter and kind of clean that up before we resin this head. That way I just want to make sure that eye is clean. The last thing I want is when I'm out fishing in the wind and cold is worrying about a buggered eye, because when you resin, even if you think there's room, sometimes those fibers trap that, and then you're going to have to sit there and pick it out when you're on the water. So make sure you're using a resin that is a thin resin, so it will penetrate in through the thread to that rabbit strip, because that's probably the weakest point on this fly at this point, is that rabbit strip coming out, and then we've lost all of that profile and going up and over the fly. So I just put on a generous amount of thin resin. It's penetrating in. I'll go ahead and give it a cure, and there we go. That is the two-tone jelly Zonker. Two-tone jelly because that's the product we're using for the body. Comes in a bunch of different colors. The tab legs come in a ton of different colors. You can get lead eyes in a bunch of different colors, and rabbit strip comes in a bunch of different colors. So nothing fancy to the name. It's just a two-tone jelly Zonker. So I love this color combo. I'm stoked to fish it. I'm stoked for all the other colors that I have, and you can always trim this tail a little shorter, but you can never add to it, so that's why I leave it a little longer, and then I'll adjust it when I'm on the water. So pretty good looking fly. Tie some up, fish them, hope it fishes well for you.